Small children narrowed me down, coming up to me. My heart was jumping out in horror. I screamed. I tried to stop them, but they were coming closer and closer, ready to tear me apart. I couldn't believe that my creatures turned against me. The day from which it all began flashed before my eyes. I woke up in a terrible mood, wishing that the evening would come as soon as possible. Today was Parents' Day at the college. Parents would come to all the students. I couldn't bear the thought of it. For everyone, this day was a holiday, but for me it was a torment. And all because I was an orphan. My parents died in a car accident when I was 6. I miraculously survived. But from that day on, my life turned into one dull lump. I ended up in an orphanage. From the first day, I dreamed of getting out of there. My real parents were scientists. And often at dinner, they had real discussions about various scientific theories. I participated with them. In those moments, I was the happiest child in the world. But then, in an instant, it was all gone. I couldn't forget my parents, but I hoped that I could find a new loving family. Soon, one couple decided to adopt me. I couldn't sleep because of the waiting for the meeting. The acquaintance went perfectly. They liked me and they took me home. Hooray! A new life was coming. But when I tried to discuss a scientific concept at lunch, my new dad said that a girl should not fill her head with such nonsense. Nonsense? But it was so interesting. I tried to awaken interest in science in my new parents every evening for a month. But they became more gloomy every day, and in the end, they sent me back to the orphanage. They said that I was too complicated as a child. What a betrayal! They brought me back like a broken toy. And this situation was repeated time after time. I got into a new family, and a few weeks later, I bored them with my conversations about science. They tried to re-educate me, even punished me. But in the end, they returned me back to the orphanage. I realized that something was wrong with me. Since no family wanted to live with me, I stopped hoping for a happy childhood. All I had in me was anger at the so-called foster parents. The only thing that helped me to distract myself from these thoughts were books. I read a lot and I began to get interested in robotics. And as soon as I turned 16, I entered the most prestigious scientific college in the country on a budgetary basis and chose the robotics. And I was doing quite well. My robot model looked almost indistinguishable from a human. After such success, I was allocated a separate room for the laboratory where I could live and continue to improve my robots. Life was getting better and sad thoughts about my family no longer visited me. I went to the classroom and sat down next to my friend Rebecca. She looked very happy because her mother, father, and little brother came to her today. What? And I thought you were the only one in the family. Rebecca replied that she was really an only child, and this, as she put it, misunderstanding, was adopted by her parents when she went to college. But now they will return him back. Rebecca replied gloatingly, "He's very loud and constantly spoils everything." It was as if a bucket of ice had been poured over me. Everything was mixed up in my head, but one thought came out clearly. I was not to blame for anything. It was all about foster parents. These monsters refused children and ruined their destinies. And then a plan of revenge appeared in my head. Now it was the children's turn to spoil the lives of irresponsible parents. After that, I worked every free minute, improving my robots. I made them indistinguishable from ordinary children, but damn, I couldn't do it. Baby robots froze, began to speak in the voices of adults, their eyes rolled up. I was desperate. But Dad's phrase always sounded in my head, which I remembered forever. If something didn't work out, try again. I was working on robots for days and nights and I thought I succeeded. There were more than a dozen robot models of different ages, from 4 to 8 years old in front of me. Now was the most important part of the plan, development of an application for an orphanage. Of course, it was not real, but no one needed to know about it. The application should help to adopt a child without all these paper problems. You log in, choose a photo and a description of the child, and in a day, they would be able to become part of the family. No checks. I uploaded my baby robot's photos there and launched the application on the internet. 10 minutes later, we received a notification about the first download of the application, then another and another. And here was the first message. Well, Miss Travis, of course, this boy will be with you tomorrow. I felt elated. I drove the baby robot to Miss Travis's house, rang the doorbell, and disappeared from sight. The main thing was that they didn't find out how I looked like. The front door opened. Miss Travis was surprised to see the child on her doorstep, hugged him, and let him into the house. The next day, she wrote a message with an enthusiastic review and said that she would recommend this app for her friend, and her friend recommended it to another. Soon, 20 families became happy parents of baby robots. I watched the family idol with the help of small video cameras mounted in the pupil of my babies. Put down with sentimentality, I entered a new line of code in the program of my robots, and then I sat down in front of the screens and got ready. The show began. 100 of my robo-kids froze, were booted, and began to trash the gap. They smashed dishes, tore wallpaper, broke furniture. The parents were at a loss. They tried to calm them down, but to no avail. Some even started shouting at their children. Crazy people. All people should take adequacy tests before deciding to adopt children. After a few minutes, my phone vibrated. Messages began to pour into my personal account. We want to return the child. No way! I immediately sent a message in response with a court summons. If you decide to complain to someone, you face prison. You have adopted children illegally. I felt elated. After all, otherwise these monsters would immediately send the children to an orphanage. I was glad to think that justice was being restored. At that moment, a request for the adoption of a child came from some Dave Brew. I opened his profile. In the activity column, he wrote, "Scientist." I immediately thought of my father, and a lump came to my throat. I needed to gather my thoughts. This was another monster who should get what he deserved. Congratulations, Dave Brew. Tomorrow you will become a father. I put the robo baby in a baby chair and took it to the house of the scientist. Let's look at your behavior, Daddy. Dave Brew turned out to be a surprisingly patient and attentive father. As far as I understood, he lived alone, but he never left the child for a minute. He even moved the crib to his workplace. It was so touching. What was wrong with me? I knew that these hypocrites treated children this way because they were obedient. It was easy to love the perfect child, but now everything would change. I made changes to the code and restarted the program. It was exactly the same as the first time. The child began to be capricious and break everything around. I watched all the scenes and enjoyed watching the foster parents suffer. But one of the screens suddenly blinked and turned off. What the? This was Dave Brew's baby. What was wrong? This had never happened before. Maybe something went wrong after the reboot. I tried to find an error in the code by connecting to this particular robot, but suddenly the message "connection interrupted" appeared on the screen. I tried to resume the program, but in vain. It was after midnight, so I put the program on reboot and went to bed. I didn't close my eyes all night, but thought about the lines of code. Nothing could have it broken if there was no external interference. Terrified, I jumped out of the bed and ran to the screens. They were all disabled. Heck, how was this possible? Suddenly I heard a strange sound from the corridor. There was something creaking, cracking, rumbling and approaching me. God, what's going on? I grabbed a piece of metal construction kit and, trying not to make a sound, went into the corridor. I was preparing to see a gang of thieves there, but dozens of robots were running around in my apartment. My robots! They destroyed everything. I was very scared and slowly went back to hide. But all the robots looked back at me in an instant. Horrors! I rushed into the room, but they were ahead of me and surrounded me. I was numb with shock. I shouted shutdown commands, but they absolutely did not listen to me and narrowed me down. They were about to kill me. I squeezed my eyes shut, preparing for the worst, when suddenly a man's voice rang out in the room. Stop! And the robots froze. I slowly turned my head. Dave Brew, the scientist, was standing at the entrance. How did he get here? Dave said that he had realized almost immediately that the child was not real. He cracked the code and gave the robot the task to find the source of the signal. All the robots were connected to the same network, so they all automatically went to the source. Dave asked me why I created fake children. I refused to answer, but then Dave gave the robots a command that they continued to narrow me down. I screamed that I would tell him everything. Dave stopped the robots, and I eagerly began to tell my story about my childhood in an orphanage, about hatred for foster parents, about revenge. I thought Dave would order the robots to tear me apart, but instead, Dave suddenly lowered his eyes, sat down on the floor, and began to tell why he decided to adopt a child. It turned out that a year ago, he lost his wife and daughter in a car accident and still could not recover. He said it was unbearable for him, and that he hoped to try to start life over again by adopting a child. I would never have sent him back to the orphanage, Dave finished abruptly, and then he added that even though there were bad foster families, there were plenty of good people in the world who were ready to love a child, no matter what they were. I almost burst into tears. At that moment, I heard the sounds of a siren outside the window, and a minute later, the police broke into the house. It turned out that Dave had called them. He wasn't going to kill me, but I had to realize the consequences of my actions. The court found me guilty, and now I have been in prison for the 2nd year. During this time, I managed to rethink and understand a lot. For example, the fact that the past can never be changed and therefore revenge is meaningless, but it is in our power to make the present better. Dave visits me every week. It turned out that we have so much in common. I think I'm irrevocably in love with him, and it seems that it is mutual. Did you like the story? Like it and subscribe to our channel. I came to myself in a room with dim lights. My head was pounding horribly. What am I doing here? I tried to stand up, but I felt the straps under the sheet. What was going on? Suddenly, a disheveled old man in a scientist's robe ran up to me. The old man with the mad look said that now it was possible to start experiments and left the room in a hurry. My stomach went cold. I pulled my hand up with all my might, and the straps began to creak. I yanked my hand again and the strap snapped. Wow, how strong I am. It's better to leave this place. I ran into the hallway in just a sheet. Creepy scientific instruments hung everywhere. What was he doing here? I already saw the exit, but suddenly I noticed in the mirror that the sheet had fallen off me. What's the matter with me? I stepped closer, dropped the sheet to the floor, and was speechless. I looked like some kind of robo-monster. 85% of my body was made of iron and parts connected by wires. But I had a human head. But then I heard the scientist's voice behind me. Where are you going? Panic seized me, and I ran for the door as fast as I could. The old man ran after me. It seemed that he was about to grab me. Out of desperation, I hit the door with my shoulder and it flew out with a crash. I didn't know where to run because I didn't even remember where I lived. Random passers-by shouted at my back that I was a freak. I ran to a parking lot, hid among the cars, and looked around. There was no pursuit. The thought of this creepy scientist catching me made me feel uneasy. I sat in the parking lot until the evening and did not dare to go out. I looked at the cars and realized the last thing I remembered was getting into an accident. And I was in a wedding dress, but I didn't know if I was a robot even then. My memories were very fragmentary, but if I had a wedding, then there was a groom. That's something. I needed to find him somehow. Only he could help me remember who I really was. Night fell, and I ventured out of my hiding place to find a quieter place. Suddenly, a red light flashed on my chest. I didn't notice it at first, but soon my vision began to darken. Maybe I was running out of charge. Like on my phone, I needed to try to charge myself. Oh man. Then an electric car passed me noiselessly. I barely managed to jump away, but stop. It was also somehow charged. I needed to find an electric vehicle charging station urgently. With the last of my strength, I trudged along the road. I thought I was going to pass out when I saw the lights of a station in the distance. If only they had electric recharging points. I quietly crept up to the station, looked around, and saw no wires, only hoses with gasoline. I was desperate, but suddenly, in the corner, I noticed a place with a wire. The station attendant was asleep behind the cash register. I crawled over to the wire, pulled it out, and plugged it into the socket on my chest. And wow, it fit! The light stopped blinking, and I felt my strength returning. But then a car pulled up at the station and shone its headlights on me. Heck! I looked around. The station attendant woke up and already noticed me. I didn't want to be arrested for theft. I took off, and in a couple of seconds, I was already very far away. When I was sure there was no pursuit, I stopped and sat down on the bench. Did I have to steal electricity from stations for the rest of my life now? In my desperation, I did notice a guy walking up to me. I wanted to run away, but he began to examine me with the words, "Wow, what a costume." What was he talking about? Suddenly, the guy asked me for a link to my TikTok. What is TikTok? The guy laughed and showed me the app and 2 favorite accounts, Mermaids and Fire Girl. Popular superheroines. He decided that I was the same. I refused, but the guy thought I was being modest and still took a picture with me. I couldn't believe that someone would like me, because a bunch of people on the street just called me a monster. When he left, I thought about what he'd said. If this mermaid succeeded, I could also become famous, and then the groom from my past would see me and find me. This was the only way I could find out who I really was, a robot or a human, but I needed to get money for the phone. The next day I went to the park. I decided to take a picture with the children for money. The guy wanted a picture with me. At first, no one approached me, and I already thought that this was a stupid idea. But gradually, a whole queue was lined up for me. It turned out people love robots. But several times the kids called me a transformer. I tried not to pay attention, and by the end of the day, I had enough money for a smartphone. The next day, I registered in TikTok and made a couple of videos about my life. I was so worried when I uploaded them. But in vain, 500 people subscribed to me every day. A few weeks later, I was already one of the most popular bloggers and was even able to rent an apartment. I didn't think it would be so easy. People wrote hundreds of comments, but no one from the previous life ever appeared. And I so wanted to know, was I a robot or was I originally born a human? I didn't even know who I was. But in any case, I knew I had feelings, but the fans were only interested in how I changed and whether I can touch the water. Once, a follower with the nickname Joker asked how my mood was. I was surprised, because everyone thought that robots were not in the mood by 85%. The Joker almost immediately offered to meet, and I agreed. He spoke to me as if I were an ordinary person. The very next day, I was waiting for him in the cafe, and then the guy sat down at my table and introduced himself as the Joker. His face was scarred, and I was terrified. He immediately reached out to me and began to repeat, "Don't leave me. I love you." Hell, he was a psychopath. I mumbled that I had a lot to do and ran as fast as I could. The Joker started writing to me on all social media, but I blocked him everywhere. That's it. No more face-to-face meetings with fans. I kept using TikTok, hoping that someone from my past would notice me. But nothing happened. One day, I was returning home from an autograph session and suddenly I heard someone's footsteps. I turned around and saw a dark silhouette. I picked up the pace, but someone was shouting after me, "We need to talk." Oh no, it's the Joker, the crazy fan. I quickly ran back to the house and locked the door. Was he following me? The Joker was shouting something under the windows, but I didn't dare look out. With shaking hands, I called the police, and an hour later, a couple of big guys arrived and dragged the Joker away. I let out a sigh of relief and tried to sleep. This was already dangerous. I needed to delete TikTok and find another way to find out the truth about my past. The next day, I went to a fan meeting. There, I decided to say that I was done with TikTok and directly asked for help from my followers. When everyone gathered, I took a deep breath and said, "Friends, I don't really remember anything from my past. I don't know if I'm really a robot or a human." The room fell silent. I probably shouldn't have said that, but suddenly the audience burst out laughing. From all sides, it was hurt. She hypes! I had never felt so hurt in my life. In desperation, I ran to the back exit. None of the fans believed me. What a fool I was. When I opened the back door, I bumped into someone. I started to apologize, but then I was taken aback. This was the scientist. He looked even more creepy than he had a month ago. I backed away, but he pulled a remote out of his pocket and pressed the button. I immediately collapsed to the ground. What was going on? I couldn't even move. The scientist took my hand and dragged me along the ground. "Help me!" But no one heard my screams. I was finished. The scientist loaded me into his car and, muttering that the experiments were not over yet, got behind the wheel. The last thing I saw was the confused Joker sitting in the car outside the club. At that moment, the red light on my chest flashed again, and I blacked out. I came to myself in the same room. The scientist muttered softly that he was disappointed with my behavior. I hope the next model will be more accommodating, he added. The scientist took out a saw and held it into my lap. Just a little bit and he would cut me into pieces. No, please. But suddenly I heard some noise. The door opened and the Joker ran into the room. Behind him, the crowd of my fans was roaring. I couldn't believe my eyes. The fans threw the scientist to the floor and tied him up. The Joker took the remote out of his pocket and turned on my body. I didn't understand anything. Why would he do this? He was my crazy fan. But the Joker asked abruptly, "Don't you recognize me, Jen?" I frowned, puzzled. What are you talking about? The Joker smiled and said his name was Kyle. He was my groom. And I was kidnapped on my wedding day. These words made my throat go dry. So I was looking for him all this time. Kyle told me that we had loved each other since childhood and wanted to get married. But on the day of the wedding, we had an accident. Kyle was saved and he escaped with scars. And then he stopped talking. What happened to me? Kyle hesitated and said, "And he died right at the scene of the accident." I couldn't believe it. But how? Here I stand. I'm alive. Kyle said that before the funeral, my body was stolen and he tried to find me, but in vain. He no longer believed that he would succeed, but suddenly he saw an interview with a robot that had my face. He thought he was imagining it, but he found me in TikTok and was stunned. I was alive. Tears welled up in my eyes, and suddenly I saw in the disfigured face of the Joker my dear Kyle, whom I had loved so much all my life. Oh, Kyle, it's so good that you found me. A few months later, we got married. Our wedding was discussed by the whole country. After that, twice as many people followed me, but I didn't care anymore. It was enough for me to have one person who saw me not as a freak from TikTok, but as an ordinary girl who also had feelings. I looked at Kyle and saw the most beautiful man on earth without even noticing the scars on his face. After all, love and kindness, that's what makes us truly beautiful. Did you like the video? Subscribe and like it. Support the channel. Thank you.